If you can dream it, we can help you create it. Welcome to the You Create podcast, the show that teaches you how to take the power and flexibility of a Stepcraft 3D CNC system and turn your ideas into reality. So let your ideas flow, because we want to know, what will you create?
Welcome to the You Create podcast. This is episode 2. My name is Eric and I'm your host, and I want to thank you for joining us this week. And I want to thank all the people who listened last week and who were kind enough to send us some comments and some feedback. We really appreciate that. This is a podcast that I'm putting together specifically for you, and I want to include subject matter that's going to be most relevant to you. And I certainly want to, as the weeks go on, answer all of the questions that you might have regarding CNC and try to take some of the mystery out of it and make it a little less scary to get involved. So this week we want to dive in and answer a very simple question. Why do you want to have a CNC machine? Seems pretty straightforward to most of us, but if you don't have a CNC or you've never used one, there's a lot of questions you might have, and one of them might be, is it worth the investment, and what are the advantages of having one versus the way that I'm currently doing things? So before CNC machines came into existence, the process of creating something, let's just talk about wood for right now, was very complicated. It was an art form. It required a lot of hand tools, required a lot of handheld power tools, required a lot of complicated measuring. You had to have a lot of different measuring devices to make sure that as you're removing material, you use a gauge. You can make sure that you haven't taken too much, and especially if you're making things like that are repeated, so that, for instance, if there was 4 parts to something that were all supposed to be identical, that process was very, very difficult by hand, and it required a lot of patience, a lot of talent, and a lot of use of measuring devices and a really good eye for making sure that everything is exact as you create each piece. So this process, like I said, it required a lot of skill and a lot of patience. It really was considered an art form, and still is for all of those woodworkers and craftsmen that still do things by hand. The tools that you used for various materials varied widely. So you might have a separate set of chisels and cutting tools for wood than you would for, say, carving foam and plastic. So you had to have a wide variety of tool selection in order to get various projects done. And the learning curve was very steep, which kept a lot of people from getting involved, as they were very limited on the types of projects that they could accomplish. Now, I know a lot of people who are die-hard hand tool craftsmen who like to do things the old school way and just have no interest at all in adopting CNC into their workshops. However, for the rest of us, the introduction of desktop and personal CNC machines makes it very, very easy for us to get involved and be able to create things that are much more complicated than the average person can do by hand. So now that we've talked about why you might want a CNC machine, let's talk about some of the advantages of actually having one. Automation is one of the biggest things, in my opinion. The fact that you could just draw something and put it through some software, set up the workpiece and put a tool in the machine, and then press start and have it cut and carve and bevel and drill holes all on its own, while you can go do something else. Or, if you're like me and you're just mesmerized by watching these things work, you might find yourself staring at it for a little while in amazement. But the fact is that it's completely automated, and the interaction that you have with it really just is setting it up in the beginning and then maybe having to change tools a couple of times during a job, depending on how complicated the part that you're making is. And then once the machine is finished, it stops, and the only other involvement you have is removing the finished part from the machine. So in my opinion, that's a pretty awesome reason to go with a CNC machine. There's a definite reduced skill level to accomplish complicated tasks. Software that's available today makes it very, very simple with a couple of mouse clicks to tell the CNC machine to do things that you would have to have months or years worth of skill with a hand tool to accomplish the same thing. So you do need to learn some new skills. I'm not going to say it's just all magic and push button. You're going to need to learn how to use a CAD program or some sort of a drawing program. Even if it's just simple things that you're doing, it's still a good thing to learn how to use these programs, because you never know what you might want to create. And knowing how to do even basic functions with a drawing or a CAD program is going to allow you to take an idea and immediately put it into computerized form, where you can then create tool paths and load material and have your CNC machine produce that idea or that part for you in a matter of minutes. And there's no doubt that the CNC machine has made this a little bit less of an art and more universal, so that more people can get involved with a lot less of a learning curve, which is always good. There's a lot less risk for mistakes. Once the machine is set up, as long as you've done your job correctly in creating the G-code file with the software that you're using, the CAM software or something like Vectric Cut 2D, there's very little chance for mistake. And in most cases, software has the ability to kind of let you preview the file before it runs. So if there was a mistake or something not set up correctly in the software, you could see it, usually virtually, at a very accurate rendering to address that problem and correct it before you actually start putting the tool on your material. So faster productivity is also a huge advantage of a CNC machine. As I mentioned before, once the job is started, the machine's just going to run. You don't have to worry about changing tools or cleaning or unplugging something, going to get another tool, changing bits, anything like that. It's set up and it's going to run. And it becomes a very, very quick process to get parts done, especially if you're in business. The output is going to be more precise. The average CNC machine has an accuracy of 2 to 4 thousandths. In some cases, even better. I know the Stepcraft machines, we can do 1 to 2 thousandths without a problem, which is very good considering the cost of the machine. Usually you're going to spend upwards of $10,000 plus for those kinds of tolerances. So that's another advantage to some of the smaller desktop CNC machines. Repeatability is another thing that's very big. If you're going to be making parts that, like I mentioned earlier, maybe you've got something that needs 4 parts that are identical, having a CNC and having a program set up, all you have to do is load the stock in the same place, zero out the machine, and when it's done, you're going to have multiple parts that are exactly the same. So that's another huge advantage. No more eyeballing things, no more making minor adjustments. Everything that you mill using the same program is going to be identical. So you have that advantage. Flexibility. The CNC machine will allow you to work with many different materials, all from one machine, which is nice. A lot of times you just have to change the tool bit and the settings as far as your speeds and feeds and depth of cut and things like that. But you can go on one CNC machine, you can go from wood to plastic to brass and aluminum, and then back to foam. So you have a lot of flexibility without having to have a different set of tools for each type of material. So a CNC also eliminates the need for many hand power tools. As an example, I have a friend who was a woodworker for a long, long time, made a lot of cabinets. And when you went to his shop, it was awesome. He had all kinds of, table saws and routers, and, you can pretty much make anything you want there. And one thing I always noticed was he had about 7 or 8 different routers that were lined up on a bench, and each one of them was set up with a specific tool bit. And I always asked him, I said, why so many routers? And he was a cabinet maker. He did a lot of raised panel doors and things like that. So each router was set up with a bit to the exact depth he needed, so that when he started working on a door, he would grab that particular router that had that bit in it, and he knew that when he ran it along the wood, it was going to give him the exact results that he was looking for. So in his case, he had 6 or 7 or maybe even more routers that were there, and it was, I always thought it was funny because how long does it take to change a bit versus the cost of buying $150 router. But if you're doing this for a living, time is money. So the ability to just grab something and have it all set up was nice. And with a CNC machine, you don't really have to worry about that. Yes, you may have various end mills depending on what you're doing, but for the most part, the machine can do an awful lot with one or two specific end mills to take the place of, in this case, he had all those different routers. And, if you're in business, time is money, and a CNC allows you to shorten the gap between the starting of a project and the time when you can turn a profit. So that's always good. That also means that you can offer shorter lead times to your customers. So rather than having a week or two to complete a project, you might be able to do it in a matter of days, which means you could do more projects back to back, which at the end of the day puts more money in your pocket. Additionally, CNC machines will allow you to have less waste material because you have the ability with the software to nest multiple parts together in a given piece of stock. That means you can calculate out exactly how to position parts so that you have the minimal amount of waste. Again, minimizing waste is also going to save you money in the long run as well. And one of the last things that I see as a huge advantage, at least in my personal life, with having a CNC machine, is that I think it's a great family activity. My son uses it all the time. He's 13. He's always got some ideas, and then we work together to get things milled out for him for projects, whether it be for his ATV or maybe a model quadcopter that he's building or something like that. My daughter's more into the 3D printing side. She's always finding things like game pieces or doll pieces and things like that, and wanting to know if we can make them on the printer, which we do. And I will talk more about 3D printing in upcoming episodes as well. So those are some of the advantages of having a CNC machine. And you might be asking yourself, well, are there any limitations? Well, there are a couple. I guess one of them really depends on the machine. Whatever projects you're going to work on, you might require a specific size machine. So you've got to consider how big of a machine do you need for the given projects that you're going to do. And if you are going to work on some large projects, do you have room in your garage or workshop for that size machine? Power requirements is another possible limitation. I know some of the larger CNC machines might require 220 volt, and if they do, you have to make sure that you can accommodate that in your workshop. Now, a CNC machine doesn't eliminate the need for power tools and hand tools. You're still going to need several things to properly finish a job. Things like a sander, a saw or a table saw comes in handy because if you go to your local lumberyard, you could buy a piece of pine, say that's 1 by 12, but it may come in 8 or 12 foot lengths. So it would help to have a saw that you could cut the material down into more manageable sizes to put on your CNC. A table saw is always good too, because a lot of times I run into a scenario where I've got a board like plywood or a piece of MDF that is too large, too wide for my CNC. So it's nice to be able to put it on a table saw and rip it down to a smaller manageable size. The sander is going to come in handy because the CNC machine, while it'll give you a nice precise finish, it's still not going to sand off the surface and get it prepared for staining or painting, whatever you choose to do to finish it. You will need assembly tools depending on the project you have. You'll a cordless drill, some wrenches, screwdrivers, things of that nature. Also, you're finishing whatever you're going to do, paint, stain, varnish, all that stuff you're still going to need. So a CNC machine, while it does eliminate the need for a lot of things, there are still some basic tools and supplies that you're going to need to properly finish a job. Now, the one thing that is important to talk about is determining what size CNC machine that you're going to need. Now, Stepcraft offers 5 different size machines, and if you go to stepcraft.us and click on any one of the machines, we have a tab that says machine size comparison, and it'll show you in a scale form how big each machine is as you go up the product line. The smallest machine that we offer is a 210, and the largest is an 840, and that number denotes the length of the bed. So the y-axis in millimeters. So 840 is 840 millimeters from the front to the back. That's the workable area for that particular machine. Now, people call me all the time and they say, what's the difference between one machine or the other? Well, in our case, the 300 to the 840 are all identical machine. The only thing that's different is the physical size. So I usually get into conversations with people on the phone to try to determine what types of projects that they're going to use their machine for. What is the largest thing that you might do with your machine? Now, I had a gentleman on the phone today that was really big into model airplanes. So he had talked about some different projects that he wanted to do with regards to his model airplanes. So after pulling some various questions out of them and answers out of them, I should say, I was able to determine that the largest thing that he might possibly need to cut on his machine would be wing ribs. And he tends to fly what's called a 30% airplanes, which are very large. So the wing rib at the root near the fuselage of the airplane could be as long as 18, 19 inches. And if that's the case, then we need to make sure that he's got a machine that has enough Y travel to be able to do a wing rib that's that long. So, you really want to ask yourself, what is the biggest thing that I'm going to conceivably be doing with my CNC? The last thing you want to do is buy a machine that's too small, and then you kind of regret it 6 months down the road when you have a project come up that's a lot larger and you can't do it in one piece on your machine. So that's something that probably the most important question that you'll need to ask yourself when you're buying a CNC system. And fortunately with us, we offer 5 different versions, so I have something for everybody for the most part. So by this point, hopefully I've gotten you convinced that you need a CNC machine, and we've talked about a lot of the advantages, and maybe you've asked yourself all the questions and you've determined, okay, I need a machine that is capable of a specific size. So we've come that far in this episode. Now we want to talk about some things to look for in a CNC machine and the company that manufactures it before you decide to make a purchase. Now, one thing that's probably the most important thing on any CNC machine, whether it be a Stepcraft or anything, is rigidity. The frame rigidity will enhance your cut quality. If the machine is built with a lackluster frame, then you're going to get a lot of vibration, you're going to have more maintenance issues, and you're going to find that your tolerances are going to be less and your repeatability will be less from part to part. So you want to make sure that you have a machine that is extremely rigid. And the most important thing to make sure is rigid is the Gantry Unit. And that's the section that moves the XYZ. It's the main component that holds the spindle. And on a wider machine, you'll find that when the spindle is in the middle, or the x-axis is in the middle of the gantry, that's where it's prone to any twisting. And a nice solid rigid machine, if you were to grab the top of the spindle and you were to move it front to back, you will not feel any movement at all. Because you got to remember, if you can move the spindle even a little bit, when you look at the tip of the tool as it makes contact with your part, that little bit of movement at the top of the spindle could translate to a millimeter or more at the bottom, which is going to affect your level of quality and the accuracy of the cuts that you're making. So definitely look for a machine that's solid and very rigid. Now, on the Stepcraft systems, we have our largest machine, which is the newer one, which is the 840. And what they did when they designed it was they designed the 840 to be super rigid. And it has a lot wider of a span than the previous machines. And so when you put the x-axis in the center, the tool center, and you move it, it's rock solid. And what they did after that was when they created the Stepcraft 2 machines, they took that rigidity from the 840 and they used all the same components, the same uprights, the same gantry parts just in a narrower width to make the smaller machines. So the 300, 420, and the 600 all have the same components as the 840, and the 840 was designed to be super rigid. So you can count on the fact that the smaller machines are as well. So, I mean, that's a little shameless plug for Stepcraft on here, but that is a very apparent difference in a Stepcraft system versus a lot of the other ones that are out on the market. And it's something you should be concerned about when you go and you decide you're going to buy a machine. Grab hold of that gantry if you can see and put your hands on the machine before you actually place an order, and see how rigid it is. I've seen some machines that look very, very rigid. They're very robust, really thick aluminum that's used. And when you grab hold of that spindle, when it's in the center of the gantry, I've seen movements of 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch at the tool. That's huge. So that's something that you want to really keep an eye on, and just know that the wider the machine that you're looking at, the more chance there is for flex. So that's when it's going to be the most important to pick a machine that's super solid. Now, support is the next thing that you should consider. Does the company that you're looking to purchase the machine from, do they offer email support, phone support? Do they have a ticketing system on their website that you could place a support ticket in for? How much information is there on their website as far as support related info and FAQ and questions and helping you progress as you have the machine? You're going to have a lot of questions when you get it, and you want to be sure that this company that you choose is going to be there to answer all of those questions. Are there any other means of support? As an example, I mentioned this in the last episode, and we definitely said that this is a podcast that's sponsored by Stepcraft. So this podcast itself is another means of support that we're offering. And as the weeks go by, we're going to have more and more information that's very specific to certain things with regards to CNC machining and with regards to some of the Stepcraft systems. So we're put this podcast together as another means to support our customers and at the same time support the industry as a whole by offering a lot of general information as well. So you want to find that out before you decide on a company that you're going to invest your hard-earned money for a CNC machine. The last thing you want to do is get a machine and have it be more headache than it's worth, because you'll get pretty discouraged and you'll never get a chance to really realize how awesome and amazing that owning a CNC machine is and what you can really do with it. Parts availability is the next thing. Make sure that the machine that you're buying, that the company is local to you. And by local, I mean at the very least in the same country, whether it be direct or via a dealer. What is the cost of their parts? I've seen a lot of times where, especially in the multi-rotor or the drone world, where you could buy a complete drone and it's say $1,000. But then if you break an arm on it and you call to order, it might be $200 for that one arm. So I know that companies do make money off of parts, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But get a sense for what common things might break and what the cost might be. Also, consider the warranty from that company. Is it a year parts? Is it parts and labor? Is it 2 years? And find out what the process is of honoring that warranty. Will the company send you the part first in replacement, and then once you receive it, you send the defective one back? Or are they going to require you to send the defective part back before they do anything? That's an important thing to find out and ask, because that will keep you down for a week or two, depending on where you live in relation to the manufacturer. So part swapping is something that is a big question, and you should ask any company that you're looking at as far as how they would handle that. And we do part swapping. So if you were to call Stepcraft and need a bearing or something like that, we're going to send it right out to you. And then if we need it back, we'll send a package so you can send it right back to us once you receive it. But keeping you up and running is always the most important thing. Now, the other thing you can ask yourself is, what other optional accessories are there for the machine that you're looking at? What else can it do? Is it just a CNC router or CNC mill? Does it have interchangeable heads? Can you do 3D printing with it? Is there a future laser attachment for it? Will it do engraving? This is important because if you're not going to use the machine as a CNC 100% of the time, then having the ability to add different attachments for it can save you money by not having to buy multiple different machines. For example, our machines have multiple different attachments that you can add to it, including a 3D print head. Now, if you were to go and buy a 3D printer, you might spend upwards of $1,000 to $2,000 easily for a nice machine. And then you still need the CNC machine. So when all is said and done, you might have $5,000-$6,000 invested between a 3D printer and a fully outfitted CNC router or mill. So with a Stepcraft system, it's $599 to add the 3D print head to any of the existing machines that we have, from the 210 all the way up to the 840. So by being able to quickly swap out attachments, it increases the flexibility that you have and the amount of things that you can do with the machine without having to buy multiple machines. So that's always a huge advantage, and that's something you should really find out when you're making a purchase. Are you stuck with this just as a mill, and then in 6 months you want to do 3D printing, so you're going to have to go out and buy a full-blown 3D printer just for that as well. So ask yourself those questions, and I think you'll be directed to a machine that's going to suit your needs really, really well. Now, in keeping in line with the original theme of this particular episode, which was why would you want to have a CNC machine, I wanted to talk a little bit about what type of materials you can use with a CNC. Obviously, there's woods, which all types from softwood all the way up to hardwood. That's not a problem. I think the only thing to keep in mind is, again, how big is the work area of your machine, and also keep in mind the Z height of your machine. So if you try to put a 6-inch block of wood in there and you only have a 5-inch Z height, it's not going to work. Plastics, all types of plastics, from ABS to polycarbonate, and pretty much anything in between. You can mill out foams. One popular foam that a lot of people use is extruded polystyrene, which is basically the blue foam board insulation that you can get at most major home improvement centers. That's great for making models and things like that, prototyping. It's a very popular material to use. It's messy. You should definitely have a vacuum system when you're doing it, because the dust will get everywhere. You could mill carbon fiber sheets. The only warning I give you with carbon fiber is breathing in the dust is very, very harmful to your body, to your health. So make sure that when you're milling carbon fiber, that you're using an exhaust system that's sucking the dust away from the bit, and B, always wear a face mask and work in a open area with, I wouldn't cut carbon fiber in my bedroom as an example. They make wax, CNC wax, which you could use for making molds. You can mill rubber, you can mill fiberglass sheets. Then you can even mill aluminum with most CNC machines, and brass. So aluminum is probably the hardest material that the average hobby grade desktop CNC will mill. I know there's some out there that will do steel, some of the smaller machines, or at least they claim they will. But for the most part, aluminum is going to be the hardest material that you'll run. And it's usually going to be around a 60-61 grade, which is really strong, but still soft enough to mill pretty easily. So those are the types of materials that you can work with on most desktop, hobby grade, and certainly industrial CNC mills and routing machines. So the last thing I want to touch on in this episode is, what can you CNC? Like, where can you find projects to actually mill? Do you have to draw them, or can you find them online? And the reality is you could work with a simple drawing program, something like Inkscape or SketchUp, which are both free. They're relatively easy to learn how to use. There's a lot of videos and support online to teach you and kind of walk you through it. And regardless, I strongly recommend that you spend some time to learn how to do the basics with these types of machines. If not, then there's websites like thingiverse.com, which has a ton of free projects that you can download and run on your CNC mill and on 3D printers. So, I mean, there's that literally thousands, probably thousands more added every week. So you could spend hours just searching through the different projects and find something that will be of interest to at least get you going on your new CNC mill. And hopefully that'll inspire you to want to learn a drawing program so that you can make customizations and come up with new things to create on your own. So there's also software out there that you can scan and trace parts and turn that into a toolpath, which you could then have your mill cut out. As an example, I have another customer actually, that is into model airplanes. There's quite a few Stepcraft customers that are into that particular hobby. And he had a airplane crash, and there was a part that he needed to have milled out, but he didn't know how to draw the part. So he had the two pieces that were broken, and I told him to put the two pieces together and put it on his flatbed scanner, his inkjet printer. He had a combination office machine, scan it at 300 DPI, and then send me the file. And the new versions of Vectric software, especially Cut 2D is the one I use a lot for 2 and 2.5D stuff, has an image tracing feature, which will actually turn the perimeter of the image into a vector that you could then assign a toolpath to. It's a really, really cool feature that's in that program. Prior to them introducing that into their software, it was a little more complicated. You could take the scanned image and bring it into a program like Adobe Illustrator or Inkscape and actually trace and outline manually around it. But either way, it worked. It's just the tracing manually was more time consuming. But the end result was a file that you could create a toolpath on, and then you could just put your plywood or balsa in the machine and run the job. And before you know it, you have a duplicate part to replace the broken one. There's also online services such as elance.com and fiverr.com that you can hire people from all over the world to do various different projects. And one of the things that I've been seeing a lot of on these websites are CAD and drawing people that you could send them a sketch or something of a project you want to make, and they will actually draw it in CAD and give you back a file that you could use to convert to run on your Stepcraft machine. So there's a lot of options there as far as what you can CNC, but as you progress with it, I definitely recommend learning how to use even the basics on a drawing or a CAD program, because that's going to open up a whole new world for you with regards to projects that you can do on your machines. Okay, so that's it for this episode number 2 of the You Create podcast. I know there was a lot of general information in this podcast as well as the first podcast. And while I apologize to those of you who are kind of waiting for some very specific kind of nitty gritty stuff, I feel it's necessary as we're starting this from scratch to put a lot of general information in. So those of you who are listening that don't own a CNC machine, we're trying to guide you down the right path and just give you a big overview of what CNC is and things you should be looking for. So bear with me. In the next week or two, we're going to have some really cool stuff coming up, and we'll start working on a lot more episodes that are dedicated on how to do specific things. So if you want to look at the show notes for this week's episode, go to youcreatepodcast.com/002. Please, I encourage you to go to iTunes and rate the podcast. If you like what I'm doing here so far, please give it a 5-star rating. That helps bump up the podcast in the rankings, and will make it more visible to newbies who are searching for CNC and 3D printing and things like that to actually find the podcast and see what we're doing. So I also encourage you to go to the website, and if you have any comments regarding either of these 2 episodes so far, there's a add a comment feature right there. So please go ahead and do that. And lastly, if you have anything specific that you want to have us talk about on the podcast, please drop me an email at contact@youcreatepodcast.com. Until then, we'll see you next week. Thank you again for joining. My name is Eric, and I hope you guys have a great week.